So, today we're going to dive deep into a fascinating report from 2017 that maps out Armenia's entire strategy for energy independence. It's a really complex story about a nation at a critical turning point, so let's get right into it.
Okay, so this is really the big question, right? For any country, energy is the absolute lifeblood of everything. The economy, your daily life, all of it. But what do you do when the very source of that energy is thousands of miles away, completely outside of your control?
For Armenia, this was anything but a theoretical problem. Just look at that number. Back in 2013, a staggering 77% of the country's entire energy supply had to be imported. That one single number really sets the stage for the enormous challenge we're about to unpack.
All right, so to really get what's going on here, we have to understand the very unique situation that Armenia was in. This is what the report calls Armenia's energy dilemma.
You see, Armenia is this mountainous, landlocked country, kind of stuck right at the crossroads of Europe and Asia. Now, a huge piece of its modern story is that it was built up as an industrial powerhouse inside the Soviet Union. The catch? That entire industrial machine was designed from the ground up to run on energy that came from other Soviet republics.
So when the Soviet Union fell apart, that whole system just shattered. And it left behind what you could only call a legacy of dependency. Let's break down what that actually looked like on the ground. Now, this chart really paints a picture, doesn't it? In 2013, natural gas accounted for a whopping 63% of the country's primary energy. Yeah, nuclear power was a big chunk for sure, but there was no question about it. Natural gas was king. And here's the kicker. It wasn't just that Armenia was dependent on natural gas. It was overwhelmingly dependent on one single supplier for that gas. A full 80% of it came from Russia. I mean, that creates a huge vulnerability right at the heart of your entire energy system. And as if that wasn't enough, you've got this other massive problem. The infrastructure was just old. The system that was built during the Soviet era went into a major crisis in the 90s. Those old, centralized heating systems just collapsed. By the time this report came out in 2017, about half of the country's power plants were over 40 years old. They desperately needed to be modernized or just replaced entirely. So, faced with this pretty daunting reality, the strategy laid out in the report proposed two really clear paths forward. Let's dig into the first one, a big nationwide push for energy efficiency.
You know, the logic here is actually super simple, but it's incredibly powerful. Before you go spending billions on shiny new power plants, the smartest, most cost-effective thing you can do is just stop wasting the energy you already have. It's all about plugging the leaks in the system.
Okay, so there's a technical term for this. It's called energy intensity. Basically, it's a way to measure how much energy it takes for a country to produce $1 of GDP. A lower number is always better, and while Armenia had made some progress, the report made it clear there was still a huge potential for savings.
So where do you even start? Well, this chart tells you exactly where to look. The number one energy user was the residential sector at 31%. Right behind that was transport at 25%, and then industry at 18%, so making buildings, cars, and factories more efficient. That was the low-hanging fruit.
All right, so that's part one of the plan. But part two, that's where things get really ambitious. It's about shifting from just saving energy to actually producing new, clean energy by tapping into the country's very own natural resources.
And this is where the story really pivots from challenges to opportunities. You know, Armenia might not have its own fossil fuels, but what it does have is an abundance of renewable resources. It's mountainous, it's sunny, that gives it massive potential for solar, wind, geothermal, and hydropower.
And look, this wasn't just some pipe dream. The government actually put some hard numbers on the table with these really ambitious targets to scale up renewable energy. You can see right here the specific goals they set for 2020 and 2025, aiming for a huge jump in energy from wind, geothermal, and especially solar.
So you've got the problem, and you've got the proposed solutions. Sounds good, right? Well, not so fast. The report is very clear that actually doing all this would be a monumental task, and the country's energy future was still very much uncertain.
So let's just recap the whole strategy. It really comes down to this two-pronged attack. On one side, you have the practical, right-now goal of efficiency, just making the most of what you've got. And on the other, you have the long-term, game-changing goal of building a whole new system based on renewables. Two different paths, but both aiming for the exact same thing: energy independence.
But, and this is a big but, the report really hammers this point home. Neither of these paths was going to be easy. Both were going to need a ton of money, a lot of technical help from other countries, and maybe most important of all, the political willpower to stick with these massive, decade-long projects and see them through. And that really leaves us with the core question at the heart of this entire story. Can a country's natural gifts and smart planning really be enough to overcome the powerful forces of geopolitics and history? For Armenia, back in 2017, this was the absolute defining challenge. And honestly, it's a question that tons of nations all over the world are still trying to answer today.